Hello and welcome to Social Church. We've got a very good question today and we've got a very good friend to be able to answer the question for us. R.C. Sproul Jr., the question that has been asked so many times, please help us answer it. Why does God allow bad things to happen?
It is one of the oldest sort of anti-apologetic questions in the history of the world that philosophers have been raising this sort of proof that God doesn't exist that goes something like this. Given the reality that there's suffering in the world, then either God must not be all-powerful in the sense that he would want there to be no suffering, but he can't keep it from happening, or God is not good, because surely if he was good, he would want there to be no suffering.
Yeah.
And that particular question has haunted Christians and apologists for years, but really the answer is pretty simple to that particular objection, and it is simply this, that we have to recognize who we are and what we're due. The foundation of the question is that any suffering that we experience is somehow a negative. And I like the fact that you ask the question with care, because usually the question comes across as, why does God allow good things to happen? Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people?
Yeah.
And when I get asked that question, my answer is always, that only happened once, and he volunteered. That is, the good person volunteered. Of course, that's Jesus. Every other bit of suffering happens to those who are under God's judgment for our sins, who are at least due God's wrath for our sins. And so we shouldn't be surprised. And in fact, the harder question is, why do good things happen to bad people? But that's not what you're asking. So the answer to the question, why do bad things happen to people, is because it glorifies God. It's the same answer to any question. The ultimate answer to any why question is that it glorifies God. That's what God is in the business of doing. He is about the business of making manifest his glory. That's why the creation happened. That's why everything that happened. God is manifesting, showing forth who he is, the fullness of his glory. Now, the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 9 essentially deals with this question. It more specifically related to even the lost, where Paul says, hey, surely we would object if God were in control of everything. Then why would God judge us when we do wrong? Why does he still find fault, is Paul's language? For who can resist his will? And Paul's answer is, who are you, O man, to question God? God's God and we're not. But then he goes on to say this. He goes on to say, what if God, wanting to show forth the glory of his wrath, endured with much long suffering? Okay? That what Paul is saying is that whether God redeems and rescues and saves a sinner, or whether God judges a sinner, either way, God manifests his glory. In the redemption of a sinner, which is what all of us are, including me, when God redeems us, he is manifesting the glory of his grace. When he does not redeem us and he sends hardship upon us, whether that is earthly hardship or whether that is eternal hardship in hell, when he's doing that, then he is manifesting the glory of his holiness and his righteousness and his justice. We've got to understand at the beginning of the question what our standing is. We stand guilty before God. Every one of us is born under a death sentence. The Bible tells us that the wages of sin is death. The Bible tells us that we're conceived in iniquity. We're all beginning our lives under God's judgment, which is where we should be, given the fact that we are by nature children of wrath. We are by nature God's enemies. We're by nature the children of the devil. So when we see hardship, we shouldn't be surprised by it. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that God doesn't call us to labor to alleviate it in the lives of others. It doesn't mean that we can conclude that the level of one person's suffering reveals the level of their wickedness. That was the mistake that Job's friends made. They said, oh, Job, you've had such a hard time, you must have done a really terrible sin. And that wasn't true. Now, Job wasn't perfect, and Job was a sinner, and so nothing that he experienced was a stronger judgment than what God owed him in terms of justice. And the same, again, is true for everyone except for Jesus. Every one of us, whatever suffering we receive, it's less than what we're due, which means even in the midst of the worst suffering, we're called to praise and thank God for his grace and for his mercy.
RC Jr., that is brilliant. I've heard that question answered many, many times, and that was so clear. Really, really helpful. Thank you so much. If you have a question that you would like to be answered on a later episode, please do get in touch with us. You can fill in a form at www.wearesocialchurch.com. We're on all of our social media channels: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Reach out to us, let us know your question, and we'll be sure to get an expert answer it soon. Thanks a lot for listening. Bye for now.